Hello there. Have you cycled through the orbits of treatment and they have never worked? Well, I have too. There's a common denominator there, so watch the following video, like or subscribe, and peace. Hello there, my name is Billy Juliana. I'm 49 years old and I have a 40-year history of dealing with anorexia nervosa, and I'm currently following the recovery methods espoused by Tabitha Farrar, Kayla Rose Katecki, and Lisa Orris. And yes, today I did want to talk about a few of my treatment lowlights from the past in order to highlight the efficacy of this method of recovery. And this method of recovery is the one propounded by Tabitha Farrar, Kayla Rose Katecki, and Lisa Orris, and a bunch of other care workers and practitioners who are jumping on this bandwagon because they see how effective it is. And I certainly am a witness to this because I have tried a lot of methods of treatment in the past, willingly or unwillingly, and let me tell you, this one is the one that has gotten me much further along with my entire life than anything else. So the whole idea behind this method of recovery is pretty simple. It's unrestricted eating for life, prolonged rest, and no more body weight suppression. And while that's very simple, it's very difficult to do because we've got all of these ideas about restriction going on in our heads. But the idea here is to get rid of restriction, is to eradicate restriction with regard to food, body weight, and rest. So if I get unbound in that part of my life, then the psychological stuff that is intricately entwined with the eating disorder can also be liberated. It can unfurl, and I can deal with that stuff much more calmly and much more rationally and be able to look at it and handle it if I am liberated with regard to food. So if I introduce unrestricted living into my being, then everything else can be liberated as well. Because a lot of us have complex psychological issues that put us where we are in the first place, that got us into energy deficit in the first place. So there are psychological issues to be looked at. But in the past, all the treatment providers that I've had have been like really eager to get to that psychological stuff, and they've kind of put the food and the body weight stuff over here. They're like, okay, let's set this target weight and let's put you on a meal plan, but we're really kind of scared of food and body weight issues ourselves, so we're gonna just put that over there and say it's not an issue, it's not really anything but a symptom, and we wanna get into that psychology. But they've come at the whole thing with restriction. So the common denominator with all the past treatments has been restriction. Well, it's my belief that getting rid of restriction is what's going to liberate all of the psychological stuff as well as my body and the rest of me. So, okay. Now, a couple of years ago, my coach put up on her website a podcast where she invited clients to come in and talk about treatment center horror stories. And the reason why she did that was she is an advocate for changing treatment as we know it. You know, treatment of eating disorders has always had a restrictive element because, like I said, treatment providers, and she says this all the time, by the way, treatment providers are scared of the whole weight gain and body weight piece. They're like, "Rrr." And so while they may make shifts into being a little bit more liberal with that stuff, they're still like clamping down on it, which is restriction. And she's wanting to change that and revolutionize that. And so she invited people to come and tell their stories. And so there's some pretty sad stories on that podcast. And I actually made a comment of my own, from my own experience to that podcast. But I'm going to go over some of my own, and I know a lot of you can relate. A lot of you have been through similar stuff, and I'm not going to go into intricate detail, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it would take years to tell the whole story. But I'm going to just hit the lowlights because I just want to say that in each of these episodes, there is nothing but restriction. So here we go. All right, so first we have when I was first diagnosed with anorexia at age 9, my eating disorder did not go hidden. It was known immediately. I knew something was wrong, but I never heard of eating disorders before. This was 1979, and I just never heard of eating disorders. But I had one. I'd gone on a diet because everything else seemed so overwhelming in my life, but going on a diet seemed like a good way to help with that. And so I went on a diet, and then all hell broke loose because I had the anorexic presets in my brain. And I started acting very, very strangely. And I knew I was acting strangely, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop it. And so my parents got in on this quick, but they didn't know what to do either. And so I ended up in a psychiatric hospital for children. And the rest is history there. I mean, I was in and out of that psychiatric hospital for a couple of years. And so nothing but restriction involved here, because the psychiatrist didn't even tell me at the outset, hey, you know what, you have an eating disorder and this is how we go about treating it. Because he knew that I had an eating disorder, but he chose not to tell me that I had one until after I was discharged from the 4 months of treatment that I had the first time around. And so I don't know what the philosophy was with that, but whatever the case may be, the whole idea about treatment back then was to talk to the psychiatrist and to be on a meal plan and get up to a goal weight. And this is kind of, common. This is how it goes. But the talking with the psychiatrist part was me doing the talking and him sitting there. Now, this may be effective for some people, but I need somebody who's going to respond. I didn't really relate to him all that well. So anyway, this just didn't work. But what did work was, after about 2 years of being in and out of the hospital, was me going, I really want to go back to school and be with my friends. So I'm going to eat enough to get my weight up to where it's acceptable, and I'm just going to forget about all this. And so that's how I basically dealt with that. Was for the rest of junior high and high school, I just blanked all this part of my life out. Now, I was still very restrictive around food and very worried about body weight and getting too big and all this kind of stuff. But I just pretended like I didn't have a problem anymore. I pretended like that was over. And so it wasn't until I was in my latter years of high school that it all kind of came crashing back down. And I persisted, and I went on to my first year of college, but it just got worse and worse and worse because the restriction, everything. And you probably know that any kind of extra stressors out there, and we have a lot right now. So people who are watching this video, you stay in recovery. We are dealing with a lot of unknowns right now, and there's nothing you can do about them other than to practice safety, but you also need to stay in recovery. Okay, let me just throw that out there. But back in the day when I got stressed by going to college, I just went down the anorexic chute and I came back home, and I'm going to skip some of the treatment that I faced during that time and get to the next phase of treatment, which was the 12-step model. So I went into a treatment center that practiced the 12-step model of recovery because this was all the rage back in the early 90s. And so everybody was like, eating disorders are all the same. They're all just on a spectrum, and they're all having to do with food addiction. And so I think that the 12-step model kind of has it right when they're saying that the spectrum is pretty much the same, but the common denominator is not addiction in my mind. The common denominator is restriction. So the 12-step model believes that I am addicted to food, and therefore I need to restrict my food in this weird way, that is, follow a meal plan that is titrated for my end of the spectrum of the eating disorder, but then practice the steps in order to keep food from becoming the center of my life and a major addiction. This just does not work for me. It has worked for many people, and I'm kind of amazed that it does, but it has worked for many people. It didn't work for me because it just reinforced that restriction. And so while the idea behind being sober and being abstinent in eating disorder recovery using the 12-step model is to follow your meal plan and be honest about it, I could never do that because I was just still thinking in such restrictive terms that I would just shave a little of the meal plan off and still feel like I was being sober enough. And I gave my whole heart, by the way, to the 12-step program. I mean, I worked those steps. I mean, I did moral inventories, I had sponsors, I did everything I could, but I didn't follow the meal plan. I just kept shaving parts of it off until it was just, nothing but anorexic living. And so it just wasn't effective for me. And so let me jump forward again to the lowest of the lights, and that is when I was put into treatment against my will. Now, I'm not blaming anyone on this. What had happened was I was wanting to go back to school, to college. I'd actually transferred colleges by this time, and I wanted to go back out there, and I was supposed to get up to a certain weight in order to be able to go back. And I wasn't doing that. What I was doing, and a lot of you will relate to this, I was supposed to get to this certain weight by a certain date. And so I was losing weight rapidly so that I would have about a week to get to that weight, and then I could just binge my way there. Because basically, all my life, I just wanted to binge because I've been starving myself all my life. And so while the 12-step model really didn't condone this that much, this is what I wanted to do. I was like, I was going to reach that goal, but I was going to eat my way there like in a really short amount of time. So anyway, so here I am losing weight. Well, my parents and my doctor were like looking at this going, she's just going to die. She's just losing, she ain't getting anywhere near this weight. So they circled the wagons and they were like, you've got to go to treatment. And I was like, I'm an adult and I don't want to go. And they were like, well, then we're going to have to fight you. And so the way it works in the United States is I get an attorney, they get an attorney, and we go at it. And so we had a court case that arose, and of course I lost because I'm looking like a complete crazy woman in this, very restrictive state that I am and acting the way I do. And so I got put into a treatment center that was local because I had to stay local because that's our court case was in local courts. And so the treatment center that was local, well, it was on its last legs. It had seen better days. And so the psychiatrist who was there had also seen some better days. And the stereotype that all psychiatrists are just a little bit crazy? Well, he fit that stereotype. Now, I don't want to bash him. I think he has a good heart overall. I think that he's a pretty good guy. But what basically happened was I was court bound to be in treatment in this treatment center until certain things happened. Basically, I had to reach a goal weight, maintain it, just crazy stuff like that. And basically, the whole time that I was there, it was a 2-year process of sitting there with the psychiatrist, and it was just basically a war between the psychiatrist and me. And he was a nut, and I was a nut, and it was two nuts going at it together. And the funny thing is that both of us were afraid of weight gain. So while he was wanting me to get to a goal weight, he understood on some level my fear of weight gain. And so he was always coming in with these diet tips. He was like, when you get to the weight that you need to get to in order to get out of here legally, I will tell you this is how you do it. And he would talk about calories and weighing yourself every day, and oh my God. And there was all this stuff. This was a 2-year process. There was all this stuff that he tried on me. I was kind of like a little specimen to him that he tried. And by the way, I was the only person with an eating disorder in this treatment center because it was a 12-step treatment center and everyone else there was dealing with addictions of other types. And somewhere along the way in there, the psychiatrist realized that the 12-step program was probably not in my best interest, but still he was always doing something that was diet oriented with my own treatment. So it was just a complete collapse and catastrophe. So that was the lowest of the lights. And again, I'm not going into detail about what happened there, but it was kind of crazy. So I finally get free of that because he kicked me out, basically. He was done. He didn't care about the courts. He didn't care about anything else. He just was like, parents, take her back. I don't want her. And it wasn't like I was just that mean or bad or person. It was just that I was just so obstinate in my eating disorder. And of course, here he is with his diet talk. So I'm just sitting there living my eating disorder, just living the eating disorder dream in his treatment center. So, and again, I'm to blame for a lot of this, or I need to take responsibility for a lot of this. I just sat in my eating disorder for 2 years. But it wasn't a fun time. And it was reinforced by this doctor's own fear of weight gain and his own extreme restrictions. So not very helpful. Anyway, we get into the 2000s. That was in the mid-90s. We get into the 2000s, and I was really over treatment by this time. And for a while, I thought I was recovered, because after I got out of that 2-year process, my parents kind of helped me out here. They kind of oversaw my meals, even though I was a full-grown adult, because I decided, I'm going to experiment with actually gaining up to this goal weight that he had set for me. Even though I didn't do it in the hospital, I'm going to do it now that I'm free. And so I did. I got up to that goal weight, and I thought I was recovered. However, whenever my parents weren't around to oversee a meal, I would skip it. So it was still restricting, and I was still afraid of weight gain, and I kind of was uncomfortable in my body, and I was like, kind of always assessing it and feeling yuck, and exercising like you would not believe. And everybody supported the exercising bit, by the way. I was gaining weight, so they were like, yeah, you just get stronger, go for it, And so I was exercising the most I've ever exercised in my life. And I was running races, and I never did a marathon, but I got close to a half marathon. But I ran a lot, and I biked a lot, and I was lifting weights, and you probably know the story. You probably have exercised a lot more than I ever did. But really exercising a lot, but eating a lot as well, and feeling like this was recovery. Except for the minute I got into a stressful environment, that is, started school again, I finally went back to college, my weight started slipping back down, and I started, going down that slippery slope of going back right into the anorexia. And so I wandered in the wilderness for the next few years, tried another treatment center. It did the same thing. I went voluntarily this time. It did the same thing that the other treatment centers had done, and that is, kind of put the weight and the food issues over here and try to get to that brain. And the doctor there, tried hypnosis and all kinds of different newfangled things with me, and it didn't work. And the whole thing is that I need to be liberated with regard to food, and I need to be told, hello, you can't control your body weight. And all these doctors out there are like, what? What? Yes, you have to control your body weight. What? And so they are all looking at this from the restrictive mindset viewpoint. And this method of recovery, and I keep pointing down, I'm sorry, but my computer is on the floor, and that to me is where all my recovery resources are, is in that computer. It's where I meet my coach, it's where I read her blogs and all that stuff, so that's why I'm pointing down. But this method of recovery is basically all about freeing myself. It's basically turning all this other stuff onto its head and allowing me to be 100% nourished and get rid of all this movement stuff. And then I can work on all the stuff that was going on when I was age 9 that started this whole thing. Wow. Now, I know a lot of you have probably had pharmacological input in the past as well. Believe me, I've had plenty of that. And I'm not going to bash it, because I do think that some of us do need medication. We just do. We need it for whatever purposes that we need it for. But there have been times in the past when experimental medications have been used on me, medications that were pitched to my doctor because they were supposed to be anorexia recovery medications. And so doctors who were kind of bumfuzzled by the whole idea of anorexia and why people aren't recovering and trying to get people's weight up were told that this medication was like the wonder drug. And so I fell prey to that back in the early 2000s. I'm not going to name the medication, but believe me, I've been on a lot of medications. The best medicine, though, for me, ultimately, is food. Now, I'm not bashing medication, by the way. A lot of us need it. But the best medicine of all for me has been food and resting. So with that, I'm just going to say the basic common denominator with failed treatments is restriction. And the basic common denominator with this method of recovery is no restriction, at least with regard to food, body weight, and rest. Of course, we have to live in a world where we have laws and all of that kind of thing, of course. But with regard to food, body weight, and rest, we liberate ourselves entirely. And you know what? Then the rest of our psychologies will be liberated as well. So with that, eat unrestrictedly, rest for a prolonged period. Do not worry about the body weight anymore. Your body will take care of that. And until next time, please take care and peace.